Oh, hi there. I'm just cleaning a comic book. Let's talk about comic book cleaning. And is it the best thing for the hobby? Up next on this video from Bronzeville Comics. Hey there, comic book community. This is Jim from Bronzeville Comics coming to you with another video. Before we get started, we've passed 4,000 subscribers. Thank you all so much who've tuned into the channel. I will be announcing my 4,000 subscriber giveaway soon, I promise. There'll be some really cool stuff available. In addition, follow us on the other socials, Instagram, Bronzeville_comics, whatnot, Bronzeville_comics. We do sales every Monday night at 10 p.m. Eastern Time. And also, there's a link in the description of this video that if you're not yet signed on with Whatnot, you can sign up through Whatnot, and you'll get $10 off your first purchase. It doesn't have to be with me. Also in the description of this video is a link to my eBay store and to my email. So if you have any questions, reach out to me there. So I want to talk today about comic book cleaning. And there's been a little bit of a hubbub about cleaning with some folks in the community talking about CGC giving more purple labels with restoration for cover cleaned. Now, I just put this book. This is a book that I'm not going to grade. It's Superboy 145. I just pulled it aside out of a collection I had because I wanted to read it. It's the issue where his parents suddenly are youthful again. But nice 12 center. But talk about, this book is a candidate for a cleaning. And you can see a lot of surface dirt there. Okay? And it goes back to historically how books were taken care of. And also a lot about the history of what we call preservation, restoration, or conservation. And there are specific terms and there's differences within them, and there's subtleties. So I go back to when I was a kid. Now, when I was a kid, there really, we're talking about the mid-70s, there really wasn't a way to preserve your books. So I think the first developer of the comic bags was Robert Bell, and this is an advertisement on the back of the 1974 Overstreet Price Guide. Robert Bell was located in Hauppauge, which is on Long Island in New York. $3 per 100. If it's worth collecting, it's worth bagging. And those are not without boards. And I've actually come across books at shows from older dealers who it has the Robert Bell advertisement with his address, his P.O. box in Hauppauge on the back flap of the comic book. So that was kind of the beginning of bagging comics. Now, as a kid, we had our own ways of preserving comic books, which now have come into disrepute. Scotch tape. Want to hold the cover on? Want to reinforce those soft bending corners? Because we handled books. As kids, you handled books all the time. You read them multiple times and flipped through them and looked at the, copied the art and, all sorts of stuff that would be an anathema to collectors today. And that's why so many of these books from really prior to 1976, let's say, just as an arbitrary number, prior to 1979 when comic shops started, are harder to find in high grade because it was difficult to keep them that way. I actually use the yellow Scotch tape sometimes to reinforce corners or edges of books, and they're still in my collection. And obviously not in high grade. And sometimes you see a lot of, especially with Silver Age books, tape on the cover, holding the spine together. That's what was done. That's what was acceptable because most people weren't thinking of an aftermarket for this. They were thinking of preserving something that they enjoyed and they wanted to read it again. It wasn't that they were going to tape it and put it away and get it graded and encapsulated back then. It was to keep it together, to enjoy it, to do some amateur preservation of the book. That also led to color touch, where kids would take magic markers and say, oh, this part of the book should be black. Let me just fill in some black or red. That's the majority of the amateur color touch was just done by kids to make the book look more like it had looked originally. I think the page trimming, which is a form of restoration, is something that dealers, comic resellers back at the time did when it was harder to detect. It could get past the, except for the most seasoned of collectors. If you were just looking to get a book to, complete a run, and it was trimmed, you probably wouldn't notice if you were, average collector. There wasn't as much information out there. And that's kind of the way. So then as we got into the 1980s and comic shops opened and bags and boards became commonplace, comics were preserved. I actually remember as a kid taking baggies, food storage bags, to put my comics in and preserve them. I don't know how good a job I did using that material. Actually, the baggies probably were not a good thing because they had a kind of a canvased texture to them, but I don't think that was pressed into the book. But it was a way to try to figure out. Most of the time, books were just loose in stacks in a box in my closet. But then as I got into the 1980s and I got into high school, found ways to preserve them. I actually had a friend of mine in high school who was really, for someone of our age, was on the forefront of preserving his comics. He had them in bags and boards stored in a file cabinet in his room. And I remember my cousin and I went to buy comics from him, and my cousin got the X-Men and I took the Avengers. I think I bought from him Avengers 160 to 200 because he needed money for weed. And he's now an anesthesiologist. But that was, as you get older, and you see this with a lot of collections. If you buy collections, you'll see if original owner collections, the books from a certain era when they were a kid, and they handled them, very frequently, very roughly. And then as they got a little bit older, they took better care of them. And then maybe as they even got older, the books were untouched because they just collected them and never really had a chance to go through and read them. So then that brings us kind of to the beginning of the 21st century when grading companies came into existence. And one of the aspects of grading companies is to identify when restoration has been done. Now, restoration includes, among other things, as I said, pages trimmed, which is usually the cover to give it a sharper edge. It's done with old cards. I actually... years ago, I bought my dad a Yogi Berra baseball card that he needed for a set, and my dad's like, this is trimmed. He didn't even have to look at it twice, and he knew that it was trimmed. Same as comics, whatever technique they use with a razor blade or whatever. What's more challenging with comics is you have to cut all the pages. And to give the edges that sharpness, which improves the grade. I don't think this book, actually, the edges are reasonably sharp. But you can see, this is just a random 1960s book. There is some surface dirt on there. So then what's become over the last 20 years and has really accelerated in the last several years is cleaning and pressing of comic books. Now, ethically, is this the right thing to do? Now, the dealers who trimmed the books or used acrylic paint to try to color touch, to pass on to customers something that looked like it was at higher grade than it was, that is certainly unethical. And people who don't disclose. I bought a Golden Age book years ago that looked wonderful. I don't think it was disclosed on an eBay listing. It was a Leading Comics. And I got it and I looked at it, and it's quite evident that there was major restoration done on this, including pieces added and tear seals and all that sort of stuff. So restoration, you have the page trimming, the color touch, and cover cleaning. Now, there are basically two different types. I would say three different types of cover cleaning. One is a dry cleaning method. The simplest thing is to take a tissue or a makeup round, and a lot of times if you get books that haven't been stored in plastic bags, you'll feel like the grit on them. I actually just got a copy of a book I picked up at a show that I could feel it, and you run the makeup pad over it, and the makeup pad is dirty. I actually have a makeup pad I just used on a book here, and you know, there's a little bit of dirt. So I probably should get rid of that makeup pad before I go on to another book. Also dirt on this side. Not a lot, but a little bit of dirt that came off the book. Then there's erasing. Now, you don't want to go too hard because most comic books from the Silver Age forward, and you're not really going to do much cleaning of modern books, except for maybe some color rub, dark onto a white space, is just use a white eraser to gently remove the surface dirt or grime. What it does not work on is things like staining and foxing. So this book, I believe I saw, has probably at the top here. It's a little hard to see, but it does have some foxing. And that's when you get those little orangish dots for a fox's fur, which are oxidation. Most likely, I don't think it's growth. I don't think it's mold, but oxidation. Surface cleaning won't get that off. You can get off particles that may have adhered to the book over years. You know, somebody was eating something while they were doing the book. Pencil marks in light areas. Crayon you can get off with Absorine or Absorine sponge. So, and generally speaking, all of those are considered non-restorative practices. And also pressing, whether one uses moisture with either a steam or humidity bath. Most of those are considered part of the trade. And it's frequently talked about, even when you watch like a Whatnot stream. This book needs a press. This book could be improved with a clean and a press. And a book like this, you know, this is a mid-grade book. It's, you know, solid. It's intact. It's exceedingly readable. And it would be improved with a clean and a press, right? There's surface dirt on here. Especially, you can tell it on these Silver and Bronze Age. The back covers tend to have a lot of white because the companies didn't want to spend a lot of money printing ink onto the back pages, onto the back cover. Why waste ink money on that? So then there's wet cleaning. And if you watch some of the conservation work of somebody like Jerry the Jitterbug, who has a remarkable YouTube channel, he does absolute alchemy with his books. There are folks that will remove the cover and wash it, put it in an aqueous bath, put it in water, potentially some chemical, to clean it out, sometimes to deacidify it. If you have a book that is starting to tan, and especially a Golden Age book that has been around for 80 years. Now, we get into, is that an acceptable level of cleaning? Now we're starting to get into the borderline. And then there's the very popular bled treatment. Bled treatment is using blue LED light to whiten the surface of the book, often with the addition of a hydrogen peroxide solution that is sprayed on the book. And there are a number of folks on YouTube, on Instagram, you've probably come across it, that do this with great success on their books. They achieve often white pages for books, let's say from Silver and Bronze, and even from Copper, that were not white before. And it's also able to lighten or remove water stains and foxing, which is an incredible benefit to the grade of the book. There are some folks in the community who feel that that is a disingenuous practice and that it is cheating the system. It is doing something to the book that's unnatural, and it should get a restored grade. The biggest problem with giving something a restored grade for a practice like that is that it is very difficult to prove that it's been done with any certainty. I am not necessarily against the whitening treatments of books. It's almost par for the course at this time. There are enough folks that do it, and there are folks that will take big books and crack out books that have stains or foxing, that they know they can whiten the book, improve the look of the book, and get a grade bump. And, you know, there are folks of two minds. I'm not going to, and I'm sure people will leave comments, but I'm not going to lambaste those folks, because what they're doing is they're improving the eye appeal of the book, right? At its very simplest level. If this was a book that was important to me in my personal collection, I'm just picking this book because I have it like lying around. I could clean this, I could press this, I could do a whitening treatment and make this look considerably better, right? It's not going to be in the 9s. There are already enough limiting factors. You know, there's color loss there. You know, there's spine stress lines or spine ticks. But it would look nicer. And maybe for my personal collection, that would be satisfying to me. There is a monetary incentive, because a book that grades at a 9.2 is worth more than a book that grades at an 8.0, let's say, for instance. And certainly if you can get a bump from, you know, 9.4 or 9.6 to 9.8, there's a considerable financial incentive. My concern is what happens to the long-term health of the book. Will, over time, these treatments and the addition of the hydrogen peroxide more quickly cause degeneration of the book? And I'm not sure. I'm not a paper scientist, so I don't know exactly how that works. It seems as though it is something that is fairly commonly used in other areas of paper conservation. But there is some sort of, you know, chemical process that's being applied to the book. So is it ethical? I think at this point, we just have to accept it as part of the hobby. And I think what is troubling, because you kind of have two sides to it, is CGC giving purple labels for books that they denote as cover cleaned. Now, they should be more specific. Sometimes you'll see cover removed and cleaned. That gives more specificity. And one of the other restorative practices is staples replaced. Now, Jerry the Jitterbug, who does the conservation, he will marry books. And in the conservation process, that's more difficult to determine, because if he does leaf casting, which is adding paper pulp to portions of the book that have disintegrated and worn away over the years or been torn. And it's to make sure that this collectible, this piece of comic book history, is conserved and preserved to stay around longer. The fact of the matter is, these books will... This book, right, which is from, let's see, 1968. This book came out when I was 1.5 years old. It will probably outlive me. If I take this, put it in a bag and board, and put it in my collection, and just leave it there, it will survive me. And what we're seeing is Golden Age books that are now 70 some odd, 80, you know, up to, what, 85 years old? That's longer than the average lifespan of a human being. So there's been a lot of work into putting, and nothing's really been done to help this book. I mean, this is a 55-year-old book. And, you know, it's still around, and there's, you know, it's not in the greatest of shape, but it still exists. I don't... Now, 500 years from now, will this still exist? I don't know. You know, it's not going to be slabbed at this point in time. And will there be, you know, somebody still interested in it 100, 200 years from now as an artifact of history? I don't know. Will, you know, these characters still be part of popular culture? That's an entirely different conversation. But I think is when a book is put in a slab. So I'll just take a random older book. Do I have one here? Ah, here's a good one. Daredevil #1. Right? This is a book from 1964. It's in 1/0 condition because the cover is split and detached. And there's parts of the back cover, significant parts that are missing along the spine. You know? Now, what's this going to look like in this case 20 years from now? Will it still look about the same? Is encapsulating it, preserving it? Now, nothing was done to clean this book. I did press it. Only because the centerfold was detached. So the centerfold was sticking out a little bit and the edges had gotten a little bit kind of frayed and crumpled. So I pressed that to get it back in the book and have it lay a little flatter so that the book looks more presentable. But you know, what's going to happen to this book over time? It's already, you know, been tanning over the years. I'm sure there is acidity in the book. But, you know, 20, 40, 50, 100, 200 years from now, what is this going to look like? What is the plastic going to look like in 20 years? That's another question I have. But, you know, if you have a higher grade book, getting it cleaned. Now, pressing is something that we just consider par for the course. Getting the pressable defects out of a book, I think that's perfectly acceptable. And it comes to the idea of what are we willing to accept to be done to the book and disclosed. Okay. One of the benefits of having a third-party grading system is they're able to disclose those types of restoration that are, for the most part, obvious. The trimming, the color touch, the glue, the tape, the staples replaced, the staples cleaned. A lot of those things are identifiable, pieces added. You know, so we get that information. Whereas 30 years ago, you went to a dealer and you looked at a book, and if you didn't look at it closely enough, it might have had any one of those pieces of restoration done to it. I mean, I bought a raw book, Hero for Hire #1. That had color touch on it. I did not notice it. I gave it to Erod to clean and press. He did not notice it, but CGC did. You know, it was some color touch on the spine. It's going to happen. And as books over the years pass through more and more hands, you know, if I have a book that I have raw and I disclose that it has color touch, let's say, does that mean the person that I buy it from, if at some point in the future they go to sell it, or, you know, they sell off their collection and that vendor then decides to, you know, move on? I don't know. That's you know, that's part of the problem of raw books, especially older raw books. You know, again, it's a golden age and restoration. You have to have a keen eye and a trained eye to pick that up, and even those with a keen and trained eye don't always pick it up. So anyway, that's my little video for today. My 2 cents. I'm sure some of you may have opinions on this. I think it goes down to, is the whitening, the bled treatment, ethical to do to comic books before sending them in to be cleaned and pressed? And on the other hand, is it right for CGC to, without a definitive way of determining if a book has been cleaned by this process or any other process other than dry cleaning, to give it a purple label? That's it for this video. You can look at a couple of my other videos here, and this is Jim saying until next time, enjoy your comics.